So, continuing from where we had left in the previous lecture, we will now focus on what is the viability of the product in the longer run. So, if you remember, we were doing demand analysis, and in the demand analysis, we did study what are the components that we need to analyze when we analyze the questionnaire and when we elicit responses from the people through a survey. Now, once that is done, we're not only interested in what is going to happen in the present, but we're also interested in how viable the project is in the longer run. So for that, even the investors, the creditors, everybody is interested in what is going to happen to the demand in the near future. So for that, we have several estimation techniques, and I'll not delve much into those estimation techniques because they are typically uh, too mathematical. But we'll see a few of them, which are qualitative techniques and may be used alongside your survey method. So coming to the qualitative methods, now qualitative methods, as the name suggests, it just makes its judgment or forecast based on not only numbers but on a few intangible factors, especially common in areas where you do not have numbers or where you do not have data that is available, or there's a firm who is entering in a new kind of a market or not a well established market. In that case, you do not have any historical data where you can crunch on data, and you do not have any data where you can use that data and then make your decision. So in that case, you would use a qualitative method. One of the very first kind of qualitative method is a jury of executive opinion method. Now, coming to this kind of a method, see, this kind of method it essentially relies on the judgment of the high level managers in a particular industry or in a related industry. Uh, this kind of a method is specifically for existing firms when they have to take up a new project. So, their own managers could get together and then form their opinions, and on the basis of their opinions, then a combined report or a sales estimate or a demand estimate is made. So, this kind of method is not very useful for a new firm, but typically it involves all the managers sitting together and then giving their opinions on what the demand is going to be. Then comes the Delphi method. Now, Delphi method is a very, very popular method. And here, what you do is that you elicit opinions of groups of expert in that particular area. And you might elicit responses through a mail or through personally visiting them or taking their interviews. So at the end, once you take their interviews, you combine their opinions and then you make your own forecast. When coming to quantitative methods, uh, simply as it states, the word quantitative signifies an estimate of a particular indefinite or considerable amount of anything. Quantitative techniques rely primarily of numbers to conclude forecasts. So it just uses some data. Maybe the data can be gauged from the publicly available reports. Then they can be placed into the data can be placed into some formula and then predict the company's sales. So you have a multiple number of methods available here. You have time series forecasts, you have causal methods, and then linear regression analysis. You can do a correlation, you can do a trend prediction. So based on the kind of data, you then can choose, or the length of the data that you have, then you can choose the kind of uh, quantitative method that you would want to use. So we can just summarize the market feasibility study into this flowchart. So once you start a business, as I said, you first develop a concept for your venture or a product concept, and then develop a preliminary marketing plan, which includes research based on market assessment, the competition assessment, and then you also test the product or services by and gauge information on the market size, the segments, the trends, and then finally develop the sales forecast. Once you've developed a sales forecast, the last step is that you have to flesh out your marketing plan. Now, once your marketing has analysis has ended, You also really need to tell in the feasibility report how you intend to reach to the customers or the prospective customers. If your prospective customers is a large amount of is the masses or is large number of people or your target market is huge, in that case you may use traditional distribution channels like you know, you may use traditional channels of marketing. For example, you may use advertising channel through the media, through the print, or if you're marketing direct to the consumer, then a separate kind of a different separate channel might be used, maybe one-on-one marketing or personal selling. And then if you're trying to sell to a government, then your channel, of course, will be different and your marketing will also happen in a very unique manner. So for this, you have to develop a detailed marketing plan for each channel that you plan to use. Make sure one thing that once you've fleshed out your marketing plan, you also have to be very clear of how you're going to distribute your your product among the consumers. If it's a service, the distribution part doesn't play a very eminent role here. But if it is a tangible product, then you have to be very clear about the logistics, and you also have to mention these supply chains and logistic details in your feasibility analysis report. Coming to the third kind of a feasibility analysis, which is an organizational feasibility. Now, it is concerned with determining whether the business itself has sufficient skills or resources to bring a particular product or service idea to market successfully. You intentionally would talk here about management expertise, how prowess, what kind of prowess they themselves have, the organizational competence, and the resource sufficiency. So we'll talk primarily under two heads here. One, the management prowess, and second is the resource sufficiency. What do you mean by management prowess? So if you talk about candidly, this evaluates the ability of its management team to make sure that the management has the requisite passion and expertise to launch the venture. Uh, the most important factor in this area is the passion that has to back the entrepreneur. Like most of the times, we see that entrepreneurs are solo, or the founding member is a solo member. In that case, he has to largely be driven by a lot of passion about his business idea. Then it also depends upon the kind of expertise that particular person has. You may want to delve into an area where you do not have expertise, and that is one very, very big factor, which is a reason for the failure of a lot of startups, where people delve into or they go into an area where they do not have sufficient expertise. For example, I'll give you an example here of a company called as Garden.com, and it was started in 1995, and it's with the agenda to sell garden supplies. Um, they they had anticipated that people would want to spend on procuring garden supplies, and they came up with a host with a list of garden supplies on their website, and people could order from their website and then later pay. The biggest drawback of this Garden.com was that none of its backers or none of its founder members had expertise or any key skill in gardening. And still they went and ventured out, and within a span of 1 year, the company totally drained out. So having a major expertise or a person who has a very major skill in the particular area that you're trying to enter into is of a big help. Coming to the resource sufficiency. Now, this topic pertains to an assessment of whether an entrepreneur has sufficient resources to launch the proposed venture. So, it does not really talk about the financial aspect, but here we have to talk about the non financial resources. I'll give you a list of non financial resources, what these non financial resources typically are, and the firm should at least list out of these 6 to 12 most critical non-financial resources that will be needed to move the business idea ahead successfully and more viably. So let's see what these critical areas or non-financial resources are. One is like the availability of affordable office or lab space, likelihood of the local and state government to support the business. So you have to really see what kind of compliances you would need here. Then quality of the labor pool available. If you're producing some kind of a tangible product, then you would want to see the labor pool as well. Then proximity to key suppliers and customers. So again, if you're producing a product, then you would want to see that what kind of raw material you require, and raw material has to should be in a close proximity so that it saves all your uh, logistic costs. Then willingness of high quality employees to join the firm, likelihood of establishing favorable strategic partnerships, proximity to similar firms for purpose of sharing knowledge, and possibility of obtaining intellectual property protection. So maybe this is an area where you cannot obtain your IPR, and that can be a very major constraint for your firm. Now, coming to the last and the most important part, which is the financial feasibility. Now, what exactly financial feasibility is that you here you would want to see and you would want to assess the whole cost and the profitability structure of your plan. And this is one area where most of the investors are interested in to look at, and they are more interested, of course, apart from the market analysis, they are more interested in seeing uh, how financially your endeavor or your venture is going to be feasible. So for this, you first have to evaluate your financial feasibility concept, and this involves one, of course, estimating your one-time startup expenditures. Second, estimate your expected monthly operating expenditure expenses. Develop the short-term financial projection, and then based upon these, you go to maybe forecast your cash flow, make a small balance sheet, and then determine your break even. So we'll quickly have a look at them. So let's see that what kind of financial assessment is required or it is sufficient for a feasibility analysis for a new venture startup. So as I said, you really do not need to go much into the technicals, but there are certain things that the investor is going to ask you, and that you should yourself ask to yourself. One is the total startup cash that would be needed. Second, the financial performance of similar businesses. The overall attractiveness of the proposed venture. And fourth, the break even point. Let's see each one of them one by one. The total startup cash that is needed. This is the first issue, and this pertains to the total money that is needed to make your first sale. Now, in this case, you essentially what you should be doing is that you need to prepare an actual budget, and that lists all the anticipated capital purchases. For instance, you want to buy, or you would need 10 laptops or one laptop, 10 laptops for your particular venture to start off. So that would come under a capital purchases and should be very clearly mentioned in your first budget that you prepare. Second is the operating expenses. Now, operating expenses are the monthly expenditures or the day-to-day expenses that you make. You have to pay wages to your employees or to the staff. You have to pay the rent. You have to pay the money to the electricity. So all these would come under operating expenses, and they need to be very clearly mentioned in your budget that you prepare. When projecting startup expenses, it is better that you overestimate rather than underestimating the costs involved. The second part is the overall financial attractiveness of the proposed venture and financial performance of similar businesses. Now, once you've clearly indicated what your budget is and what are your expenses going to be with respect to operating as well as the capital expenses, you now would want to also see that what is the overall financial attractiveness of similar businesses, and that would also give you a very sound footing, and that would give you a very strong foothold of why you want to go ahead with this kind of a business. So like if you see how would you do that, you would estimate the proposed startup's financial performance by comparing it to similar already established businesses. And there are several ways of doing this. Of course, you'll have to do some little ethical detective work there. One, of course, there are several reports that are available on the public domain, and they're openly available. And you can really do that detailed industry or trend analysis, and then see what are their profit after taxes, or what are their returns on investments, and that's available for I think thousands and thousands of individual firms. So you can just go ahead, see their profit and cost structure, and then make your own analysis. And second is a simple observational research, like what's going around you, where is the area where you think that you might enter and you may gain, and there is a lot of potential in that area, or there is some gap that's there, and you would want to fill up that gap. Like for example, in the hypothetical example that I gave you in the very beginning, the owners of New Venture Fitness Drink would estimate their sales by tracking the number of people who visit a similar kind of a restaurant. So this fitness drink restaurant um, was a very health conscious restaurant. And what you could do is that you could just see the number of people who are visiting similar kind of health conscious restaurants, and then you could estimate what is the average amount of money that a person spends there every month. Okay, so that's how you would then uh, come to your own conclusions, and you would come to your own forecasts. Then the third part is how you would determine your break even. So once you have outlined your outlined your total costs, you also have your sales figure with you. So the sales figure, where did it come from? It came from the market analysis that you did. You have your cost and you have your sales figure, and you know that once you are doing sales, what you would earn is that you would earn revenue. And once you make expenses, you again would have to give some part of your money to expend some part of your money. So you, as you know, that break-even point is that point where both of them become equal. So your sales becomes, or your sales revenue becomes equal to the amount of expenses that you are making. And that is the point after which you start making profits. Now, for any new venture, the time gap between the starting of your venture and the time between achieving your break-even point should not be very, very long. Greater is the time period, greater would be your loss area. So if you see the loss area here that's mentioned in the graph, uh, your loss area would just go on increasing if the time period goes on increasing. So this time period should not be very, very high, and you should be able to achieve your break-even point somewhere between year one or two. That's by the book it says, but you should try and achieve your break-even point very soon. So it's the level of operation at which a business neither earns a profit nor incurs a loss, and it is useful in planning tool because it shows entrepreneurs minimum level of activity that is required to stay in business. With one change in the break-even calculation, an entrepreneur can also determine the sales volume required to reach a particular profit target. Now, when we have to see the financial feasibility, there are certain pointers that I've collaborated that says that if you have these pointers there, this would entail a very promising business opportunity that you are pursuing. So the very first pointer is steady and rapid growth in sales during the first 5 to 7 years. So if you have a very steady growth and you have an increasing trend in your sales during the first 5 to 7 years in your typically defined market niche, that's a very good sign for your company. And it shows a very strong foothold in terms of financial feasibility. High percentage of recurring revenue, meaning that once a firm wins a client, the client will provide recurring sources of revenue. That's again a very, very positive source that your clients are going to recurringly come to you, and they're going to become source of your revenue again and again. So it's not a one-time use or one-time use of your service or a product. It's a recurring use of your service. That is where you would generate most of your revenues and your customers from. Ability to forecast income and expenses with a reasonable degree of certainty. So you should be able to forecast, or you should be able to make predictions, and that prediction should not be something that's not actually practically possible. So you should try and encompass all the contingencies, and then predict with some degree of certainty that this is the level of income that at least I'm going to achieve. Then coming to internally generated funds to finance and sustain growth, so you have to be very clear about how your internally generated funds are going to be used to sustain growth. and availability of an exit opportunity for investors to convert equity into cash. So you have to really see that there some exit opportunity or some exit window exists. Even if the startup fails, you can just quickly convert your equity into cash and make money and move out. Now, another very important aspect of the financial feasibility is how you would want to finance your startup. One, of course, is that you use your own money, which is known as your bootstrap financing. The other two ways is where you look towards outside for money, and that is the angel investors route or the venture capital route. So we'll just quickly have a look at that. The angel investor is an affluent individual who provides capital for business startup, usually exchanged for convertible debt or ownership equity. So, angel investor is the person who will enter at the very, very seed stage of your company and who sees that there is a strong potential in investing in this company, and he would want some kind of an ownership in the company. So, and these angel investors are very high in affluent individuals, and they will provide some kind of capital for a business to start up. And in the very first, uh, you know, uh, in the very first stages of most of these entrepreneurs or the startups, what they do is that they keep approaching a lot of angel investors who can fund their projects and who can fund their startups and then help them move ahead. The second is a venture capital. Now, venture capital is a type of a private equity capital which typically provided to high potential growth companies in the interest of taking the company to a very a bigger scale. That's an IPO. Venture capital investments are professionally pooled funds. They enter a firm after the firm is well established. Now, one thing you would want to ask here is that what is the difference between a venture capital and an angel investor? See, you have to understand at this stage that a venture capitalist would enter into a company uh, at a different time. Uh, an angel investor enters into a startup at the very beginning stage. However, a venture capitalist enters into a firm when it is slightly well established. So it's after the seed stage that the venture capitalist would enter. And now that it sees that this firm is a little established and uh, they have uh, they have a very high chance of or high potential of growth. In that case, this venture capitalist would enter into the company and then make its investment, and then it generally exits before the company goes to an IPO stage. You do hear about most of these firms, big firms who are big startup firms getting venture capitalists or getting private equity funding. And this essentially happens when they see that the firm is now doing very well and now it is the time to enter. Coming to the third and the final way of financing a startup, the third is the bootstrap financing. That's the process of creating a business from scratch without typically any investment. And what you do is that you fund your expansion and you fund your growth only through your internal resources, such as reducing expenses in the budget, collecting some rents, leasing out, or make delaying payments to vendors or pre-selling some of the units. So trade credit, taking things on credit, things like this would help you in funding your expansion, and this is known as bootstrap financing. A lot of smaller startups that begin startup that begin at a smaller scale use bootstrap financing, where initially they use some of their own funds and then to grow or to expand they use their reduced expenses or delayed payments or take some trade credit to to fund their expansion. Okay, now that brings us to the end of the entire feasibility study and the analysis. Let me now just take you through what we have done so far. So we were talking about a typical feasibility study, and if you see, and we discussed this in the very beginning also, that what we have to do in the feasibility content but typically entails to four factors. That is your concept feasibility, your market feasibility, your organizational feasibility, and your financial feasibility. So the very first step in your typical feasibility study is the concept for your venture, and you really have to explain very clearly and concisely what the principal concept underlying your venture is and what sets it apart from the other businesses. Then you have to explain the technical feasibility, like what is the innovativeness of your venture, the idea, the risk associated with this. Then you would come to market assessment, where you would clearly define your target customers, your niche area, your market size, the trends, the seasonal patterns. How do you want to test? Any kind of market research you want to do, any research surveys that you would intend to take up. Assess the nature of your competition, which is very crucial, and also estimate your expected sales and your market share. Then you would also in the end want to tell about what your marketing plan would be, like what is your marketing strategy going to be, what kinds of sales promotions you will be using, the pricing, the channels of distribution, etc. And then at the last in your marketing plan, you would try to tell about how you're going to continue your access to critical supplies, raw materials, the component parts at reasonable prices. And will you produce or subcontract your production? You'll have to answer those questions. Then coming to the cost and the profitability assessment, for instance, you would want to tell how feasible your product is financially, and there you would want to tell about the cash flow forecast, like what exactly your cash flow is going to be in the 5 to 7 years of your operation. You will also have to make a small profit and loss statement, like a pro forma would be given. You might get this from a lot of internet resources also, and then you could make a small pro forma on your profit and loss statement, a small little balance sheet, and then your break-even analysis, as we talked about. Would also want to mention here that what is your source of funding going to be? Are you looking for some angel investors, or are you going to bootstrap? And what and how you're going to expand further? Then you also have to plan for your future action. What are the strong and the weak points of a venture idea? Did your assessment indicate the business was likely to be profitable? Is it sufficient attractive to proceed with the development of a complete business plan? So if you say yes to all of these points, and then you would move ahead and then make your business plan. So it's like a prerequisite for a business plan that you first have to make your feasibility analysis, and then this becomes a premise to make your business plan. Thank you very much. And if you need to contact me anytime, you can contact me at sakshisharma.phd@fms.edu. Thank you very much.